is the order of their presentations. Alsoko of Eastern Cape, Lawrence Swanepoel from Tshwane, Dr. Matete Makunyama from CSIR, Davi Bosch from City of Cape Town, Robin Chetty from eThekwini Transport Authority. I have support with me, Debbie, sorting out some of the IT matters that we had troubles with. Welcome to everyone. It is tough times for all, working from home and all sort of other things in our environment. Just to present the order of how things are going to happen, we will have the 5 presentations as introduced by myself, and we will hope to finalize that in about 50 minutes. Then there will be a question and answer session based on the submitted questions at registration. And that will take about another 20-25 minutes. Just a note on this question and answer matter. In the Zoom platform, you will see there at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A part. Not everyone can see the Q&A part, but everyone should be able to communicate with friends and say hi to them under the chat environment. So if you look at that part, you will see chat and Q&A. Depending on how fast we go, we will have time for probably 2 questions from the Q&A. And for that reason, I have our other committee members helping me with that, Victor de Abro and Madeleine Engelbrecht, one in Joburg and Madeleine in Cape Town, to assist me in filtering through the questions and answers to really pertinent questions that we can use and ask the panelists. And we really aim to not close later than about 16:35 or so. We all have other commitments. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm going to now introduce our first speaker directly. Al Soko, he's an engineer at the Eastern Cape Department for Transport and Transport Systems Planning. He's a planner and researcher in the department, and he has substantial experience in consulting, in the government and academia. He assists in the macro planning for the province using geographic information systems and assisting with the statutory plans for the department. His special interest is public transportation, intelligent transport. He holds many degrees, and he is a member of the various institutes as indicated there. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. You need to start sharing yours, and then the floor is yours. I will give you a warning at 9 minutes should we get close to the 10 minutes. Thank you all. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And as introduced, the name is Al Soko from the Eastern Cape Department of Transport, responsible for planning, amongst others. You will have to run a bit faster so that I can do the 8 minutes I've promised. Okay, as the introduction in the introductory remarks have said, we started with, in March, all of a sudden we were confronted with the coronavirus. But one of the things that I think we were confronted with, or we were just reminded, am I still audible? I hear an echo.
I think it's fine, Al, if you can move on.
All right, but one of the things that I believe we had to recognize and to recognize going forward beyond COVID is that South Africa is, in all facets, an unequal society. It reminded me of one of the categories of our in what was then called the Moving South Africa agenda, that of the stranded. That sector of our society, that sector of our public transport system is still stranded. And it is one of the sectors that in everything that we do going forward in terms of planning and policy formulation, we'll have to think about. I will speak about it later on. But I think what is equally important in terms of transportation in general is the issue of recovery, to be able to pick up your transport system from where it was to a better state going forward, and then starting to model and come up with permutations for future scenarios. We may continue. All right, I'm not going to dwell much on this one, but I think we need to recognize that transport is a collection of systems. There is infrastructure on one side, your roads, your harbors, your airports, and so forth. There is vehicles in the middle, it being public or private. And then there are rules and regulations that govern that whole system. And it is very important to always understand that interconnectedness when we deal with planning and when we deal with policy formulation. Let's move on, Debbie, please. And like in any system, you would have realized that when one of the three of the systems that I've mentioned is in any way disturbed, there's frustration, there's chaos, and in the middle of that, opportunities do arise. A lot of those opportunities, maybe I'll have time during the discussions to talk about some of the opportunities that are as a result of the emergence of COVID-19. And of course, there's a lot of innovations in the middle of that as well. Shall we continue? Let's continue. Let's go past this one. I'll summarize it in the next two slides. Okay. But I think in summary, all I wanted to say is to give a perspective, not that the Eastern Cape is that peculiar to any province in South Africa, because I'm sure it's no different to Limpopo, to the Northwest, to the Northern Cape, to the Northwest Province, to the KwaZulu-Natal. But I think when we deal with these so-called rural provinces, there is some peculiarity. In summary, it must be understood that in the Eastern Cape in particular, there is a lot of people are dependent on what we call social grants. It's not only the adults, it's the young adults as well. And all those people are dependent on public transport. And we have seen the problems with our public transportation system with the emergence of the coronavirus. But what is equally important, which reminded me how problematic things can be when the curfew was instituted earlier in April, is that in some places in the province, there are three particular travel patterns: a travel between the settlement and a town next door, and traveling between the towns from one town to the other, and travel in the so-called long-term distances, which is between the inter-district movements. At times, it's not very easy to control those things. But one of the fundamental and important, interesting elements of our in the feature of our public transport system is the use of light delivery vehicles. As unregulated as they may be, as you would know that in terms of the National Transport Act, they are not supposed to be used as public transport, but it became interesting then to understand how then were they coping with the issue of 70% in a public transport vehicle and so on. And all these things are run by independently and by privately owned individuals. And it becomes an interesting element, but it will be even more interesting going forward as we talk about planning and public transport planning in general. Let's continue. Let's continue. Then, as I've said earlier, in the midst of this COVID-19, it's time to think about things differently. It's time to think about a lot of other things and try to do a lot of things in a different way. Perhaps it does give us an opportunity to improve not only our physical infrastructure, but both systems and policies. And as you would remember, there is a lot of known unknowns, and then there's a lot of unknown unknowns, which then take us to the future that we envisage. But in the mix of that, there is one thing for sure. People still need food, they need medical supplies, they need to get to some emergencies. How then the public-private partnerships work in that environment becomes imperative. But I'm sure we can make some ways. I'll talk more on this as I continue. Carry on. Have we learned anything in the wake of the coronavirus? I'll put only one at the moment, is that the transportation system needs to learn to adapt very quickly. And as we go forward, we do understand now, and we do realize that transportation plays a pivotal role in every both this day-to-day activity, it being private or it being the public transport scenario. But one thing for sure is that we need to maintain resilience going forward. Continue, please. The other element is the issue of adults. I've spoken about the older citizens who in any way, we know that most of them do not necessarily have their own transport, but they are at a higher risk of the spectrum. The above cannot be overemphasized for the case of the Eastern Cape. If needs be and time we have, I will explain a bit later on that one. But what is also important is that the lower income groups become another, because they do need to go to the supermarket on a daily basis. They are probably not like some of us who are living in the suburbs where a supermarket is only 600 meters away. And then in the mix of that, in these moments in particular, we know that when the whole organization and whole humanity has been shattered, public transport needed to shine. Whether it did that, it's open for debate, but I'm sure we'll get time to talk to that later on. Freight transport didn't do bad. What we do know for sure then is that to effect any future services, we need to learn from some empirical examples, from some empirical evidence. Not that I know of many at the moment in South Africa. There might be some good practices elsewhere from where we can learn going forward in response to the pandemic, and also to extricate from the existing practices that may need to change moving forward. Regarding the taxi industry in particular, luckily there's a question on that one. Maybe we should leave it and then I'll talk to it when we get there. But the issue of regulation and professionalization comes into mind. Let's carry on. Okay, but I think one of the issues that we'll have to think about going forward in trying to put together some policy frameworks, especially for the cities where there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of people that need public transportation, is a potential. I don't know if it's possible for pressurized in our public transport system, the automated counter, so that when a certain threshold is reached, the doors can automatically close, and then we can then at least reach those transport people within the regulations of a particular of that particular point in time. Of course, you will know that when you think about the Eastern Cape, you're not going to get your cow train, you're not going to get much of your Prasa run trains. You will get still the public transport industry dominated by the taxi industry in the main. Let's carry on, please. Moving forward, there's a lot of things that I know now. We are talking virtually. Remote working is probably something that's not going to go away. Television and video conferences are things that we're going to get used to. The issue of staggered working, even at school, is something that we might have to get used to. One of the things that I've been advocating for, especially in areas where there is congestion, especially your metros from Durban to Johannesburg to Tshwane to Cape Town to Port Elizabeth, and maybe some small emerging cities like Mthatha, is the deployment of travel demand management. But how we do that is some of the things that we need to talk about when we develop our policies going forward. Let's continue, please. One thing for sure, of the negative impacts of COVID, when people are paranoid, when fear gets into people, the increase in private vehicle use is likely to increase. It's likely to be a feature in with its own negative impacts, because there will be congestion again. And we know that the negative impacts, the outcomes of congestion will be the emissions. But how then do we manage that is what will be important. In closing, Chairperson, it is therefore strongly recommended that South Africa, the transport sector, its systems be improved, not only for what we call in the white paper, safe, reliable, and efficient transport system, but so that we can recover and prepare for the unknown future of pandemics. But if I were to quote from Professor Raymond Statner on the 29th of June this year in the Daily Maverick, he summarized something nicely, which I think we should use in our thinking. Until South Africa is a more equal society, some who go to work are forced to travel in badly ventilated taxis and live in conditions that make them more likely to interact with those who bear the virus than those of us who can easily travel and keep safe at home or anywhere. They cannot therefore help inadvertently bringing the virus to work and at home and in contact with customers and their colleagues. That is the nature of the coronavirus in an equal society, something that we need to work for and work towards. But like I've said earlier, if tomorrow South Africa were to be declared corona-free, would we say that we have learned anything? Are there anything that we can take going forward in preparation in an event another pandemic happens? Or would we just go back to our normal ways and forget about everything else? I always say that South Africa is a very forgiving nation. And it's likely that we're even going to forget the coronavirus 2-3 years after it has occurred. But what is important in the transport sector in particular is what I call recovery. The transport sector, its systems and infrastructure need to go back to pre-disaster conditions or even better, with lessons learned from the disaster itself and everywhere else in the world. That, I think, takes us to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Al, for that very concise presentation related to particularly the circumstances in the Eastern Cape. If I may just have a bit of a summary of what I could take out of that in your presentation is really the matter of older adults that need to have public transport, the lower income that need to have transport and to get to their normal daily duties, homeless individuals, they're the most vulnerable people. And you are saying that public transport should shine, but I think that public transport is at the moment not really shining. May I just, in the last, thank you very much, Al. We'll come back to you when we get to the questions and answer session. I want to introduce the second panelist. I don't know whether my screen is shared, Debbie, because, oh, it says they share, so that's fine. Lawrence has many years, more than 30 years of experience in transport, integrated transport plan, ITS matters, traffic signal, various engineering fields that he was involved. He's a specialist transport economist with vast experience. Since 1988, involved in transport planning. He has a BCom and a BCom honors degrees, and currently he's the divisional head transportation planning, roads and transport department for City of Tshwane. Lawrence, we are over to you, and I will give you a warning when you get to 9 minutes. Thank you very much. Over to you. Thank you. Lawrence, I will stay on until you are ready. Are you ready?
Thank you, Frederick.
Can you just share your video that we can also see your friendly face? Thank you very much. There we go.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you. Thank you very much, Lawrence. You can roll.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Maybe just before I start, thank you, Program Director, and then just a good day to a good afternoon to all the ladies and gentlemen, especially my colleagues from the City of Tshwane, and then some of my former colleagues at Royal Ascona and DHV. In terms of, if I can just start the presentation with respect to level of content, I'm keeping it simple, a few introductory remarks. Then specifically the changes that we've observed during this last 3 months with respect to transport patterns, then how these patterns or how these changes might impact in the longer term, looking at in our crystal ball, and then some opportunities entrenched in transport plans and a few concluding remarks. Okay, I think first of all, we need to recognize that COVID-19 is an equalizer for all countries and cities. Whether you're a first world country or a third world country, we're all confronted with the same problem. And the characteristics of this problem is uncertainty and unknown and unpredictable, and there's fear in some instances, and there's social difficulty. People are not used to working the way they are, and so on. But what's very, very clear is that there's no blueprint on how to overcome this pandemic. And South Africa response might be totally different. We've got different circumstances, different challenges. Our townships and our informal settlements are very congested and close to each other, so the high concentration of people. So we have got unique challenges with respect to that. Then with the levels that we went through level 5, level 4, and then level 3 of lockdown. There's different expectations, different outcomes. And with all those, there's different changes. Initially, it was only the essential workers that could work, and then later it started opening up to where we are now. Transport is a derived demand. In other words, transport cannot operate in isolation. If there's no demand, it has to adjust to that demand. The City of Tshwane immediately started with a public transport COVID response plan, but the overall the concerns, first of all, was the issue of making sure that we don't spread the virus any further, and secondly, that we keep the economy alive and to do it at least what we can in terms of essentials. Then some of the changes that we've observed over these last few months. There were quite a lot of job losses. Now, you'll see most of my statistics that I've got in my presentation is not necessarily linked to some empirical data or very scientific things. I'm making quite a lot of assumptions. It seems like the job losses are between 10 and 12%, and companies are closing down, staff are being retrenched. There's other staff working from home and so on. So there's definitely a lower public transport demand, and the need for traveling is much less. And the demand is still down now, even in lockdown 3, still between 50 and 60%. So that's just the feeling. I just want to cover a couple of aspects. First of all, what is the impact on the commuters? With level 5 and level 4, limited services were rendered by the bus operators and taxi operators, but because of the demand that they can't take up. And then what I call COVID tax. Commuters are at this stage paying higher fares. They're bearing the brunt because they're paying for this empty seat next to them or between them. And specifically, the taxi industry is forcing these higher fares onto the commuters. Then the impact on service delivery. Clearly, there's lots of interruptions. Just in our case with Tshwane bus services, it's been halted 3 times since the 1st of June. The standard operating procedure agreed between the city and the unions is of such a nature that if a person is tested positive, the service is halted, which is not necessarily the right way to do it. We can perhaps do it differently, and I think that will come in as time goes on. That you perhaps just, if a specific driver is tested positive, that you'll just disinfect that bus and close off that immediate service, but not necessarily, or a route or so, but not necessarily all 3 depots. So that is a big problem at this stage. What we've also seen is with the impact on the bus and the minibus taxi industries, is operational difficulties, the issue of sanitization of vehicles and facilities, the issue of issuing of hand sanitizers, and making sure that everyone has got a mask before they board a vehicle, and that has an impact on the boarding time of operators. The main thing is the capacity utilization aspects, where buses are only allowed to operate 50% of the capacity, and this is standing and seated capacity. So buses can, at this stage, I think it's in the order of 39, 40 passengers per trip. Minibus taxis is on 70%, but higher, but still only about 10 passengers per trip. Then the main concern on the bus and taxi industry is the issue of operational viabilities. The payloads, the business that the bus and taxi guys are in is selling seats, and in most instances on trips, they sell the same seat more than once on a specific trip, and that makes it viable. So at this stage, the cost coverage is problematic. The additional COVID, the sanitation cost is something that they're not bargaining for. So the whole business model is on its head. And those are realities in terms of some of the changes that we've seen. In Tshwane, the rail service is at the moment not operating. The Deneboom from Mamelodi side, Deneboom to the city was operating, but that is even stopped. So the rail service is not something we can rely on. In our CITP, we've got the so-called backbone as rail as being the backbone, but really it's not working. So we need to go back to the drawing board and plan differently. With levels 4, 3, and 2 lockdown, there were different impacts on the different components of the public transport industry. As I mentioned, that the Tshwane bus service is not getting started really, because just when it gets started, it needs to close down again. At this stage, we're still 90% down on passenger figures. The Arayeng BRT system operating in the area is also taking a lot of strain. Overall, only about 85% or 85% down, so it's only about 15% of our normal passenger figures. Then the subsidized bus services are also taking a lot of strain, about 75% down on passenger figures. If you look there on the table and the different levels and the different dates and so on, the peak vehicle requirements of bus services, and specifically now the type of services like PATCO and so on, in level 5, they only operated for the services that are crucial, which was about 10% of the vehicle requirements and shifts. That went up to about 33, and currently it's depending on the specific business unit and the depots and so on, it's between 40 and 60%. But even on that, on level 3, as we are now, the bus services, subsidized bus services, are only operating about 30% of their normal passenger figures. So it's really, really problematic, and it's from a financial viability point of view, it's really a problem. Then during level 4 rather, public transport could also only operate up to 8 o'clock at night, and only after 5 o'clock in the morning. So that also restrained the services quite a lot. Then the closing of the school, it's estimated that about 20% less vehicular traffic is on the road, so just because of the fact of the schools being closed, and that's now gradually starting to open. These changes will impact on transport in the long run. Now, this is where we need to look in the crystal ball. With the job losses specifically, we're not sure as to whether it's blue collar or white collar workers that actually lost their jobs. But the feeling is that the white collar workers will jump back quicker within a year, but they're also not necessarily your public transport users. So the blue collar workers are more the captive market with respect to public transport, and one can see that in a period of 1 to 3 years, they will get back to where they were before COVID. Then the whole issue of working from home, another impact on the long run. Before COVID, it's quite interesting that in the United States of America, with 9/11, there were attempts to work from home immediately after that happened. But networks couldn't support it and so on. Then with the 2008 worldwide financial recession, there was a second attempt of people to start working from home, and specifically in America and Europe. And that went a bit better, because some of those trends also started sticking. Now and
Sorry, Lawrence, can you speed up a little bit?
Okay. Now we've got Teams and Zooms and better data and more reliability and so on. So things are going better, and there might be a little bit more people that will go over to. So that some of those trends will stick. It's definitely not for everyone, and we can see that there might be a with working from home, we can reduce the demand to between 20 and 30% over the long run. Then also online tertiary education. Some of the colleges and universities we can see can in future do long distance or distance based education, and that can save on things like accommodation and traveling expenses and so on. Okay, just on terms of the opportunities opportunities entrenched in the transport plans. First of all, the integration of all public transport modes with the integrated public transport networks, coming back to our issue of rail being the backbone of the system, Arayeng being the catalyst to development. That's quite important that we get all the modes into the mix. If I move on, public transport we can also have a different approach where we have smaller vehicles with higher frequencies and so on. Travel demand management, our CITP talks quite extensively about the travel demand management. One of the main aspects of TDM is the issue of improvement of mobility and flattening the curve, to use the buzzwords of COVID. We need to flatten the curve where we've got the peak periods let me go to the next slide. I had a brief brainstorming session earlier in April or so with ITS and just some slide that we used there. The typical peaks during the morning and afternoon peak, one needs to bring those peaks down with things like scattered working hours, flexi time, scattered working hours, and also having office workers to start thinking working shifts so that they can, and also same with schools. Companies and schools are at this stage more willing to experiment with something like with TDM type of measures, and we can definitely with road infrastructure being a scarce commodity, we can definitely reduce travel demand with about 20% and extend the life span of infrastructure. NMT, very important in Tshwane. We're doing the K69 Solomon Matlangu, where we're bringing non-motorized transport along the road. As the road getting upgraded, we also make sure that NMT is done up to standard. Institutionally, it's important that I think it's an opportunity where all three levels of government can get together and focus on a single thing. City of Tshwane is aspiring to become a municipal regulatory entity or take that function from the province, a contracting authority also with the subsidized bus services, and also obviously the planning authority. We need to establish or get the intermodal planning committee up and running. In Gauteng, we are quite different from the other provinces. Gauteng has also now established a Gauteng Transport Authority, where they're playing a role with respect to overarching planning, policy making, strategic planning, and so on. And the Amendment Act talks about the public transport integrating committee. So the metropolitan areas will all have IPCs or intermodal planning committees, and these will then work up towards the provincial transport authorities public transport integration committee. I'm going to skip some of these.
Your time, Lawrence, your time.
Okay, just one or two more slides. Just one thing on the municipal taxi industry. I think we need to start biting the bullet. We need to get them into the mainstream of the public transport system with registering them as businesses, bank accounts, SARS, UIF, get them registered on all of those. And then just leaving a question with, I'm asking, can't we book a seat? Similar to air and long distance bus travel, can't we also, with commuter travel or public transport, book a seat for a specific trip? Then the most difficult thing is the issue of changing of land uses. I think that's not so easy said than done. Just in conclusion, I'm basically looking in a crystal ball. No one really knows where we're heading. I did have brainstorming sessions, as I mentioned, with consultants and also operators, and I also spoke to a guy like Mike Schuessler, who's very important, well-known economist. No one really knows where we're heading and where we're going to. And I say that the future ain't what it used to be. We really, moving in the mist. And also don't necessarily believe that we use the buzzword new norm. I think it's going to be over the short to medium term. There's going to be some change management that we need to do, but over the longer term, it's it's going to be fairly business as usual. Mike Schuessler, if I can just quote him, he says, as an economist, we don't have models to predict viruses and fear factors. So, and I think that's very important, that we really don't know where we're Thanks, Frederick, and sorry for going over.
Well, that's fine. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Just a summary, and that is that you've given us a lot of background related to some reading material. I think we can use that a lot moving forward. But I think one important part is really, as we are seeing on the screen now, is that the long-term changes that must happen under public transport. You've mentioned travel demand management, non-motorized transport. You've mentioned the whole matter about mini bus taxi industry and how we can bring them into the mainstream. Land use that you've mentioned, it's a worry in the immediate, but in the long term, we need to start thinking in a different way. Lawrence, thank you very much. We'll come back to you when we have the question and answer session. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, being Dr. Mateta. My screen can just move on. That's it. Dr. Mateta Mokunyama. He's an Impact Area Manager in Transport Systems and Operations at the CSIR. He really believes in sustainable transport service provision with substantial years of experience, more than 20 in a built environment, public transport operations, academia, local government, private sector consulting. He has particular research interest in the context of appropriate transport modeling techniques. And I think we are at the time where we need to start going quite back to basics in terms of how we model and not just try and remodel what we think it is. Mateta, over to you. I'm going to stop sharing if you can just share your presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Program Director.
You're welcome.
And good afternoon to everyone, colleagues. I never thought I would see a day where, politicians talk about modeling as much as they do today. You hear about models, Department of Health models, premiers talking models. I remember while I was still at the city of Johannesburg, I went to the MODAL committee. I was presenting some updates of models, the city's model. And then there was a question, what is this model that you're talking about? What is this thing? Try to explain it. And then I said, okay. And then they brushed it off. But I think it's good times that we're living in. From a political, perspectives, modeling is becoming the buzzword, and I think we need to capitalize on this. And then coming to the topic at hand, transport and healthcare have always, been, linked. There's a number of studies done to show the linkages. I was working with a student who graduated last year at Cape Town University, and looking at, the linkages between chronic disease and transport provision, and how national health insurance can start covering such things. But historically, it has been shown that transport can be an impediment in healthcare if you're not designing services to take care of requirements, specific requirements for healthcare. For example, with HIV/AIDS, there are a number of publications that have shown that because of poor transport, high cost transport, patients cannot go access medication, and that defeats the purpose of providing free healthcare. So there's been linkages. So the challenge for transport planners is to make sure that in the transport plans, things like healthcare are explicitly provided for. You'll struggle to find, transport plans that cater for this sort of requirements. So the key question for us is, what should transport planners know and do in order to improve the representation of travel behavior in the transport plans, of course, in the context of the uncertainties presented by COVID-19, for today's presentation. There are, Al mentioned a number of things around the knowns and unknowns and so forth. We're dealing with a lot of unknowns. Is this thing airborne? How effective are masks? And the type of air conditioning, how effective is ventilation of a certain type? Distance, is it 1 meter? Is it 1.5 meters? Is it 2 meters? There's a lot of question marks. And when you plan in the context of all these uncertainties, you don't know which direction to take. So we need to invest in proper research and development that then helps us to plan with a bit more certainty, be more directed. And you see this in a lot of the what is happening around the world. I developed some habits during lockdown of reading newspapers from all over the world. So I've been picking up on these topics. So there's a whole variety of interventions that are being implemented all over, and contradictory statements are being made. For example, Singapore says you can load public transport as much as you want, as long as passengers don't talk amongst themselves. They put on a mask. And then you've got other countries that say no, maintain 2 meter distance, others 1 meter distance. So there's a lot of contradictory intervention. So we need research and development to then help us, direct us on what is appropriate going forward. And very important also, what I've noted is planners are not necessarily don't have a voice in all these interventions. Very, very seldom you hear we're doing this because of a plan. There was a plan informing what we have done. I think is only around what I've seen. Hong Kong has done quite a good job in terms of developing plans. So when this thing came, the outbreak, COVID-19 outbreak came, they dusted off those plans and implemented those operating procedures. So we need to have plans that help us become a lot more resilient. You look at the likes of Brazil. This picture was taken sometime in June, late June. You see that the public transport is packed to the brim. Questions of how do you load becomes quite critical. From the data that we have, we've shown that with the restrictions that we've implemented in South Africa, at best, bus operators would cover 28% of their costs. Metro Rail is losing around 200 million of revenue, just customer revenue per month. And then minibus taxis, to break even, you have to load at least 60%. If you're doing frequencies of 14 trips, let's say, per day in urban areas. And because you've got this high standing costs, high overhead costs, you really need to run the services, to load them, so that you can at least break even. We've seen some of the mobility reports from Google showing us how behavior has changed in South Africa relative to a baseline. So what you're seeing there is the change, the relative change in the presence of people in public transport. And you see level 5, a lot of change happened there. And the takeaway message is that regulations can actually change behavior. We can change behavior. We can alter behavior if we want to. There has been, some behavioral changes. And then there are, of course, some naughty people later on who just went out their ways. This one picture is taken from a report by Vodacom. CSR works closely with Vodacom and other mobile service providers to track a number of metrics. This shows you just before lockdown and just after level 5 lockdown, what has been happening in terms of people who travel more than 10 kilometers. This is routing. And you see on the right that people who travel longer than 10 kilometers on the periphery, they are still there. They've been there even after lockdown. So just indicating again that our economy buys long distance. We've got a lot of people traveling long distances still. So we've got a lot of these historical things that we still need to sort out. So what COVID-19 probably has shown us is some of these cracks amplified, especially around spatial transformation. So it must be there in our transport planning agenda. We cannot run away from it. Then I'll also mention some things around the Moving South Africa. They've done some way back in the late 90s. I retrieved some of the statistics there. So essentially, what's important there is that they subdivided the market into a number of segments, and then they predicted by 2020, which is this year, how things would have changed for the different market segments. The stubborn people who will use only cars would have increased by 88% relative to the base. The population would have increased by 38%, which was actually accurate. But where I think they got it wrong was around the selective, probably overestimated, and also the stranded are underestimated. But important thing, takeaway here is that way back, we wanted to segment markets, understand nuances in the travel markets so that we can design things associated with specific market segments. We have lost a bit of that over the years. So what we need to do is make sure that we individualize, we understand individual travel behavior. What you see there, those are variables. All of those are variables. A unique person, travel for a purpose, departure time, arrival time, modes, and so forth. Those are variables that we need to incorporate in our plans. They can change anytime, any date. But what we see often is that the plans become too deterministic. So the feedback loops that are required for us to learn are often missing in the plan. So embedding these feedback loops becomes quite important. Also embedding the feedback loops in the whole value chain of the built environment. We've got policy, planning, design, and so forth. So when you plan right at the beginning, you need to foresee what maintenance, what operations need to look like, so that when you face projects, when you budget projects, you take those things into account. You do scenario planning more and more. So the days of deterministic planning are over. We need to use a lot more scenario planning in what we do, going forward. So in conclusion, Chair, the way forward, based on the lessons from a few weeks of COVID, more than ever, planners need to take their leadership positions. We need to, of course, leadership doesn't mean to force your way. You need to listen, you need to empathize. We're not just talking, we're talking people's lives. So when you plan, think about that, empathize. It's not just numbers, it's people, it's individuals with needs, wanting to go to work, school, and so forth. You need to care. You need to be aware. We need to learn. As planners, you need to learn. What you learned 10 years, 20 years ago has changed quite a lot. So we need to read. If a planner hasn't read a new book in the past year, I'll be very worried. You need to be responsive, guide decision makers. So we need to lead. Use of scenario planning, I've mentioned that. Strong feedback loops in our planning in the built environment value chain. We need a lot more of that, going forward. Decisive investment in research and innovation. We need that more than ever because of the uncertainties that we're facing. And of course, very important, multidisciplinary inputs. You cannot be in isolation as a civil engineer, as a planner. You need to have inputs from ICT, health, and we've seen that with COVID. We need to open to that. Even with our undergraduate students, we need to, when they do projects, they need to, do design projects with, political science students, with health students and other disciplines, so that they get used to seeing that solutions are not just engineering solutions. Solutions are broad solutions. They are solutions to solve problems, not just what we call engineering problems. And then the last thing, Chair, is the agility of decision making. We need agile supply chain management, especially in our government, cities, municipalities, and so forth. We have been exposed, and we need to review this, going forward. With this, Program Director, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you very much, Mateta. It's a reminder to all of us about the basic principles of planning and design. You need to analyze scenarios. You need to consider what you are actually planning to achieve. I'm just going to quickly share that last slide of yours again, because that is quite an important slide. And we can just talk quickly through that again. And that is the matter of more than ever planners need to lead. That's what you said, and the use of scenarios. Otherwise, you get to an answer, but high road, low road, all of those matters. It's clear that transport cannot be dealt with in isolation. We know that. And in that way, we can link people from A to B and goods, bring it to people. It's important that we really get back to our principal environment. Mateta, thank you very much for your presentation. Quite insightful and instruction to us as planners and transport engineers to really apply our trade with the basics in mind. I'm gonna just, the next is a bit of a disappointment to me, and that is that Davy Bosch has encountered an administrative problem, and he may not present his presentation anymore. So we are skipping that. We will see whether we can't have him on board again at our next event. Apologies for that. It happened while we were busy with the previous presentations. I'm going to introduce Robin Chetty. He's the Senior Manager of Public Transport Planning with eThekwini Municipality, the eThekwini Transport Authority. And at the moment, he's Acting Deputy Head Strategic Transport Planning. Robin is a professional engineer with qualifications from the University of Technology, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and a master's degree in business administration also from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And thanks, Robin. He's also been a past chairperson of the division, and in his spare time, he is also a pastor at his church with an honors degree in theology. Robin, may I ask that you really try and stick to your 10 minutes, for the simple reason is that we want to really get to the question and answers session. Thank you very much, Robin, and we are all ears to listen to what is happening in eThekwini. Thank you. Okay, Robin, that is quite clear. You may go. Robin, can you just make sure your speaker is on?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My apologies. Can you hear me now, Frederick?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Some technology challenges, but I'd like to wish you a very good afternoon. I know it's been a long wait to hear me, but anyway, let's go with this. So my topic is the same: how to recognize and incorporate travel behavior changes due to COVID-19 and existing planning for the betterment of transport systems. And oh, why am I stuck? Okay, so the question that we were asked to actually present you today was threefold. The first thing is what changes have been observed in the transport patterns, reflecting on how these changes might impact transport in the long term, what opportunities may be entrenched in transport plans. And so the first thing is the changes that have been observed. You know, people do not like change because I believe that change involves a lot of energy. But this pandemic has affected and is affecting travel in unprecedented ways. I think the long-term effects will depend on the interventions of councils and government. We heard it quite strongly coming through about leadership, the way our PT commuters, communities and citizens will adapt. We're all talking about this new normal, which is yet to be defined. And then how people change their travel behavior, which I read some stuff where it says it's referred to the psychology of change. And then the increase in unemployment and the effects of the recession. And then again, I'd like to stress in my presentation about leadership. So what are the changes that we observed, reflect on, and the opportunities within the eThekwini municipality? So very quickly, to give you a global picture, I think that we've seen globally that there's been a reduction in public transport ridership from anything from 60% to 90%. And we've seen a great increase in private vehicle trips, walking trips, and cycling trips. In South Africa, we've seen a major reduction in public transport ridership. And that was like almost from 78% to 100%, depending on the alert levels of the lockdown. And then, you know, before the crisis, I mean, if you looked at the modal share in South Africa, we had bus that was 23%, minibus taxi 66%, rail was 11%. And then we see in the lockdown alert level 5 in April 2020, the bus modal share was about 30%, minibus taxi 70%. In level 4, it was about 35%, and minibus taxi 65%. So really, public transport was about 77%. I'm going to really shoot quickly because I've got time constraints. This was really just showing you in the lockdown, the public transport restrictions, and we could see that in level 5, the minibus taxi occupancy was about 70%. And then this is really showing a slide about the public transport ridership impact. And you can see that. And then I really want to concentrate on this. This is our, in eThekwini, unfortunately, due to maybe procurement issues, we were not able to do a lot of public transport surveys. But this is really from our cordon surveys. And we found that in lockdown level 5, was, I mean, the road transport or the vehicle volumes were minus 70%. In level 4 was minus 47%. In level 3, it's getting down to minus 30%, and it's almost looking like normal. If you start driving into our city, I mean, even very like today, seems to be a lot more traffic back on the roads. I just pulled out the slide just to give you a sense of the crash reports received 2018, 2020, and you can see quite clearly here that there has been a reduction in accidents. And if you look in April, we had about 997 as compared to previous years, about 5,597 in 2018, 6,115 in, so what am I saying? 6,115 in 2019, and it came down. So we could see that the accident stats actually came down, and that's we were obviously getting these accident reports from the police stations. And we saw in March 2020, the crash forms are down by 29% and 26% compared with 2018 and 2019. And then incoming forms for April 2020, it reduced further by 78% compared with March 2020, and by 82% and 84% from April 2018 and 2019, respectively. In this lockdown 4, we're seeing, which was implemented from the 1st to the 31st of May, we're seeing that with the ease of travel restrictions, the number of crash reports received for May 2020 has increased. In fact, the very first day when people were able to go back to the bottle stores, it was amazing the number of accidents in Durban, even fatalities that happened because I'm not sure whether people are drinking and driving, and that caused that. So nationally, we saw that over the Easter holidays, there was 162 people killed. And then that was 2019. In 2020, we had 28. And there was an 82% decline. And must remember, this was during alert level 5. So we still look forward to comparing the accident rates once our traffic data for this period is available. My colleague, the last time when he presented, we began to show you that the traffic volumes during the COVID-19 lockdown, you can see these are all the major roads. It was 40% reduction over a 12-hour period. There was Kusani Road, and then 33%. And so these are the major roads in Durban. You can see 45%, 39%. And then Soldiers Way, this is the inner city. You can see the reductions was 45%, 42%. And then overall, even overall within the CBD was about 45% reduction over the 12-hour period. And this is just basically giving you the statistics and the numbers compared with 2019, 2020, and the changes in terms of the reduction in traffic volumes. I just tried to show this graphically so that you can see it. I'm just going to rush quickly. And then, so the summary of the observation, I think there's the aggressive lockdown regulation has removed the demand from the systems somewhat. There's a lot of work from home, and it appears to be the norm for corporate South Africa, which is actually equal to less impact on the road congestion levels. And then we talk about public transport. I know the minibus taxi relief fund of 3.5 billion announced in April 2020. I'm not sure whether it's been implemented, but and then also we're not really sure about the total impact from the minibus taxi because we haven't really counted those numbers in Durban. And then it's also worth noting that there's no active streets or slow streets being implemented as yet. And then more, I think that for our city, what we've seen is that there's been an aggressive increase in e-hailing services. And I think that there's a real fear for people to travel on public transport. And we're finding a lot of people are preferring e-hailing because it's now the new door-to-door service. And that's been increased. We were getting numbers like almost 8,000. And pre-lockdown, it was probably under 2,000. So there's a massive increase. And even if you drive our streets, you begin to see a lot of e-hailing services around. In terms of PRASA and rail services, for both the alert level 5 and 4, there was no rail services. And there is a resumption plan that was supposed to kick off on the 1st of July. And that is yet, I think it was supposed to happen on Monday. I'm not too sure as yet whether it has started, but it has started on a very, very low key at this point without major impact in terms of the rail services. We've seen a massive increase in active mobility. You go around Durban, a lot of people running, cycling, a lot of scooters in terms of Mr. Delivery and those kind of services. And then the big question is the PT fare increase from the 1st of July 2020. That has not really happened in our city as yet, but we still need to know what the impact of that will be. However, we know that Santaco has taken the decision to operate at 100% capacity. And in our city already, you're beginning to see that. And then I think the major observation is about strong leadership. And I think leadership in government, in our field, in really having strong leadership to push some of the opportunities that we see. So what are the reflections that I take from this? And this is from our city. I think that, quite frankly, if you look at this, this has been the city's vision and objectives, to be Africa's most caring and livable city. And we all talk about a financially sustainable city, a safe city, an accessible city, an environmentally sustainable city, a city creating sustainable livelihoods, a socially cohesive city. And the common thread is, sustainability. And we can still see that transportation is a key driver in achieving sustainable cities. So with that, I'm just saying, so what has really changed and the reflections that I see that will impact transport in the long term, we kind of have a new normal. Travel behavior is likely to be lower than the pre-lockdown. However, the question is, will South Africa follow international trends? And I don't know, we seem to be quite different and unique from other cities around the world if you look at the way we do things. And then we're seeing activity and travel habits during lockdown and during ramp-ups could remain as choice inertia, and choice users could still be using their cars. It's going to be quite a challenge to move people from private cars to public transport. And I know we've been trying, even going a small scheme like 5% and 10%, but I actually think that's going to actually move forward. And so that could have a major impact on the plans. And I think not really in terms of the plan, but really in terms of the infrastructure that we want to put, it's just actually moving forward. In terms of public transport will continue to be the main mode of travel for the PT captive users, and it's actually being seen in the city right now. Rail in Durban will probably not operate to its capacity due to physical distancing and their own challenges that they're having right now. And I mean, that's a big blow to us, because rail is still the main, the backbone of public transport in Durban. Uber and Medi taxis will continue to compete strongly within the PT sector. And then I'm saying, will PT patronage recover and follow global trends? And I think that's still to be seen, even as we heard from the other speakers. In terms of business, we've seen companies have adapted to allow more work from home. Example, the IT companies. I know there's a big IT company here in Durban. They have like close to about 2,000 employees. And since lockdown, they've not gone back to the offices. They had a major problem in terms of parking in Mshlanga. They were parking like in La Lucia Mall and the like. And I just been told that even up to now, they will probably not go back to the offices. So it's going to be a new thing. Other companies are on a remote rotational cycle, even that with government as well, we're seeing. People have acquired new skills like internet shopping, distance, working from home, and meetings like what we're having today. The need for business travel was zero with the airlines being grounded, but business still continued. And so I think that even in terms of airline and air traffic, that may change as well. And then we're seeing peak spreading and flexible working hours, which we always wanted to have. And then I'm saying adjust business models and supply chains, empty planes, tourism, hospitality, aviation will face long-term challenges resulting in low travel. Durban is a tourist destination, and since for the last 3-4 months now, there's been very little visitors to our city, which impacts our economy and obviously impacts employment. And then urban mobility. I mean, this has been a real positive, I think, where we're seeing an increase in non-motorized transport, which is cycling, walking, running. And then Mr. Delivery services. I mean, this is just taken off by storm, because you cannot go to a restaurant, but you'll just see motorbikes zooming all over. And then cycling and walking has really been strengthened, both from a commuter perspective and also from a health perspective. And then government interventions. And I think we need to spend some time and just talk about this. Government, I think, right now is succumbing to the informal public transport industry. You know, there's a lot of challenges there. I'm not sure how that will pan out. And there's changes in priorities to health and resilience and not transport at this particular point in time. And then I think like the darling projects, like your IPTNs, etc., may be stalled, budget cuts, and these projects may probably be pushed maybe 10 years into the future. And government will play a greater role for a while, and we may accept more radical measures to stimulate the economy, which can benefit or de-benefit transport projects. Government may rethink densification and TODs that we're trying to implement. And then leadership will make or break our transport systems. And then people, again, we're seeing that people have changed their priorities to health, family, work, and resilience. There's a new way of, they learn new things now with internet shopping, distance learning, working, and all those kinds of things. And then people's reluctance to ride share, use of public transport, and this can increase private vehicle volumes because of that. And then will this result in an increase in e-hailing services, which can be the new door-to-door services? And if you think back in the day, that's how the minibus taxis came on board. They provided door-to-door services. And now with the areas being bigger, that's not really happening. So would the e-hailing vehicles actually start doing that? And then just to conclude with some opportunities, this is where we'd like to be. The slide looks really good. I just put some, number one is capitalize on the flexible working hours to promote TDM measures. And I think as the city of Durban, we had this year, and we've been trying for a long time. For example, peak spreading, flexible working hours. Now is the time to act. Now is the time to maybe put some of these things into place. I like this quote. It says, cities that seize this moment to make it easier for people to walk bike and take public transport will prosper after this pandemic and not simply recover from it. And then I think we encourage improved online services. I mean, that's fantastic. I don't know whether a lot of people go back. I mean, I'm studying theology. It's a complete online learning platform, goes right up to a PhD level. Whether that will be the new norm as well, which will start to reduce traffic. Greater or improved online services like medical, shopping, banking, customer care, etc. And then the big thing is big data. Big data will become key in planning for basic services or disaster management. And I think now is an opportunity just to seize the moment. I mean, we still try to do conventional surveys in terms of public transport surveys using manual methods. But now I think it's like the opportunity is there. Technology and infrastructure will become a new way of designing infrastructure, smart cities, and then changes in city and suburb planning, rethink densities, rethink street layouts and designs, lots of initiatives to improve travel demand management, increase in freight and logistic movement with increased online activities, something that we can think about. Fast track, prioritize urban mobility. As I said, now is the time. And then the need to create these 15-minute cities, you know, to live, work, stay, and play together with the less need for major transport system. And I mean, I just want to show you a picture. This is Milan, which introduces a scheme to reduce car usage after lockdown. As I said, that some of the darling projects are actually going to be pushed forward. Maybe now is an opportunity where we can start to do all these kinds of things. And then lastly is like, I like this here, you know, about, this is the triple access system. It was developed by Lines in 2016. It talks about land use system, transport system, telecommunication system, and you can see that all these things are linked in terms of accessibility. And so the question is, how do we configure this for the future? And I think we still all are striving for this to what we want to do: global connectivity, securing production, density, compactness, complexity, sustainable transport, green infrastructure, efficient services. And I believe that this pandemic and this crisis has been, is there for us today to actually seize the moment. And let's see how we can start to put these things into action. And I close with a quote from Martin Luther King says, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin. Very insightful, lots of data, but also some food for thought. Important, and we all experience that, the substantial drop in traffic, lots of people being saved through not having motor car accidents, crashes, and the resilience of people that can adopt human beings. But I think your comment about the 15-minute city is quite a valuable one. I'm not going to share too much of your presentation. It will all be in the document that will be shared with everyone. I want to move into question and answer session. Let me just get that going. And first I want to make a few comments. Firstly, we are substantially over time in terms of the presentations. Should anyone have the need to leave, you are welcome to do so. You will still receive the feedback. Due to some hiccups in the beginning of the session, we ran out of, well, we are going to run out of overtime. I think it's very important that we spend time on the question and answer session. These questions and answer session that we are going to deal with now deals primarily, well, it deals with the questions that you as the attendees submitted during the registration period. I'm quite excited to report that some of the very crucial questions came from youngsters 26 and 33 years old, but also some critical questions from a certain gentleman who's 84 years old, and I'm going to refer to him a little bit later, and I hope he is still attending. In terms of the let me just make sure, is this shared? Let me just get to that share, and then we can just deal with those questions. We've received many questions related to until when is we're going to have these circumstances and which factors do we need to apply. In Mateta's presentation, he reminded us that sound engineering principles also always need to be followed during our investigations. And we have seen it over and over that one size does not fit all. So if it works in eThekwini, it's not necessarily confirmed that it will work in Tshwane. Each transport authority will apply its own policies, and therefore we as engineers in planning of transport or transport planners or town and regional planners, they need to we need to engage more and not just stick to some code that has been developed past. In the past 3 months, it was really too short to do some research. It was absolutely valuable, the information that particular Robin shared with us in terms of the drop in numbers and the changes that we've experienced. And I think it's, we will all refer to some of the information that he shared with us. Related to this matter of research, the University of Cape Town has embarked on a survey and some research work, and we are going to send you a link if you are prepared to participate in that. Research is going to really help us moving into the future. We at Transport Division of SAICE, we try to facilitate discussion and stimulate thinking, because we need to really get back to the basics of transport and move into a new environment. And now the question is, now how long will it take? Well, the question is, and we've seen in Lawrence's presentation that he says, well, what are the economists predict? My question always is, how long is the string? The cure for COVID-19 is likely only to be found in 2021, so who knows, it may be earlier. And until then, we're not necessarily sure how it's going to happen. However, all of that said, we've gone through the questions submitted and we derived 7 themes out of these questions. And from the Q&A session of today, I am noticing that many of these may be covered in those themes. The first, and I've seen it in many of the presentations even today, is the work-life balance situation, working remotely. That's one theme. The next matter is formalizing the taxi industry and strengthening the bus services. The impact of COVID-19 on formal public transport against private car usage. There's a whole issue about people are afraid and the social distancing matter. How do we deal with improved land use planning? Non-motorized transport, I've seen it, and city rejuvenation. Robin just mentioned now the 15-minute city. There were substantial questions about network optimization that deals with public transport and other transport. And then there were matters that we need to consider in the rural transport environment. So what we've done is to allocate some of the, we formulate a question based on a series of questions for each of these themes. And I'm going to just present that now. And then at the bottom, you see that there are people to respond. Now, we all know that Davy Bosch may not be present anymore, or he can't be present anymore. So I will ask any of the others whether they are willing to just give an opinion on this. The question is working remotely the future of some work? Just a note, Forbes have done a survey in April this year already, and remember they are about two months ahead of us in terms of COVID cases, and with 25,000 Americans responding. 49% workers might work remotely, they found. All workers older than 55 years to work remotely. And the other point is 12% of workers were laid off. That means roughly 60% of people are not going to work in their offices anymore. In South Africa, what is the case? And what do we predict going forward? Lawrence, can we hear your comments? I'll stop sharing this, but just switch on your video and then we can listen to your response. Thank you, Lawrence.
Frederick, I'm not sure if you can see
Yeah,
me.
you're alive.
Okay,
You're alive.
great.
Thank you.
I think quite a lot of the companies, or most companies, wasn't even in that frame of mind of thinking of the possibility of working from home. And with COVID, I think most companies realized, but it actually is possible. And quite a lot of people didn't know what Teams is, and they didn't know what Zoom is until end of March, when they were forced to quickly find out what it is and how it works, and so on. I think it also depends on the nature of the work that you're doing. If you're dealing, for instance, with very confidential information, I've got friends in the banking sector. For them, it is a mission to get online, because there's passwords and one-time pins and I don't know what else every morning, just for them to get access to their systems and so on. So you know, the basic things is having a laptop and having data access and reliable data access and so on, but mainly having access to a specific company's drives and, you know, this, computer systems and so on. I think that's quite important. It definitely is not applicable to all sectors. The typical blue collar workers that I'm talking about, you know, none of them will really be able to work from home. You know, so that's just an example of the type of industries and the sectors and so on. So the type of work category, I suppose, is quite important. You know, for professional people like accountants and lawyers and that, you know, that's definitely possible. But I think we can definitely achieve, as I mentioned there, about a 20% reduction in trips, if one makes it a serious case to try and work from home. Yeah, I think I think it's just the fact that it can't really work for everyone. I think each and every company needs to find that out for themselves. And as Matete, for instance, said, you know, the interaction between people, and specifically in this type of environment, is crucial. People need to rub shoulders from time to time. It's not only that you can do everything online. Yeah, I think that's basically.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's quite a good. We need to consider the facts again and take it out of the work environment. Robin, I see you are on, or Al, any of you want to add? Robin, I see you're going to add a few sentences. Thank you. 1 minute.
Yeah, I just thought that looking from the other perspective, I really do see that working from home is going to become part of the new norm. But I think as the cities, we need to gear up for that. Is that are our houses geared for office working? And then number two is that how do we start considering home working in terms of plans, submissions, and plan approvals and those kinds of things? So I think that's something that needs to really be looked at. If you're saying like almost 45% of people want to work at home, then that's an issue. I mean, that's something that needs to be looked at. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's back to the companies and government sectors to consider how they can apply their own rules in terms of what can be done. Thank you. That was a general feel from the questions. I'm going to put on the next question. Sorry, I must first share that again. That is the matter of formalizing the taxi industry. Formalizing the taxi industry and strengthening the bus services. It's really a twofold question. You can't do the one and without the other. The taxi industry holds government at the moment at ransom. How to formalize the taxi industry and increase the tax basis, and for the same reason, then there will be a subsidy available, probably. And that is against how do we resuscitate the bus services to provide the safe and reliable services. Al, you have thoughts, and then Mateta, each of you, maybe 2 minute or so response. Thank you.
Dr. Mkonye, might want to start? Okay, let me give it a shot. I think at the end of it, there is a need for us to look at the historical emergence of the taxi industry itself in terms of how then, as a government, we respond to. Of course, I know even in my presentation in the paper that I've written earlier in the year, I have said that the COVID-19 does perhaps present an opportunity for government to really look into the subsidization, but I think we'll need to weigh various subsidization models that will work for both the state and the customer that is being subsidized, and also work for the operator, which is the taxi industry in this instance. But there is a need for willingness on both sides, especially from the operator, to be regulated. And there's a need for regulations. When it comes to subsidies, we know there's a need for a lot of regulations and rules that must be abided by both ends of the spectrum. Whether government is, whether the operators are willing to be regulated, that's another question. But also the current model, is it really possible to subsidize the taxi industry in its current form, or should government look again into what is called cooperatives? I think Mr. Sonepol will talk more onto that. I think he has written a lot on cooperatives. And the last part is it possible for entities like Santaco maybe to start converting themselves into PTY LTDs so that at least government funds an entity other than trying to find 4,500 individuals? I think for now I'll put it there, but I've got more comments in an event we've got more time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Al. Dr. Mateta Mokunyama, what do you say about the taxi and buses?
Okay, there's a lot of opportunities, for going forward in the public transport industry for both, road-based modes. For taxis, for example, the data shows that the interface between taxis and trains is quite strong. There's an organic relationship there. In fact, from the surveys, half of the rail users come from other modes, mainly taxis. So the feeder taxis is quite strong there. So in terms of integration, there's an opportunity to incentivize that interface. So you want to start with those organic. So where things are working, make them work better. So and then build from that, build on success. And of course, the complexity that, last thing is just to say, the complexity that operations are, means that we need to invest in building technical capacity within the industry, the operator industry. Often just someone who was working somewhere else and then starts getting into the business. So that we need to invest in that. But that cannot be done by cities, authorities. I think the industry needs to come on board and say, let's invest in our education system. But there are lots of opportunities. It will require quite a bit of leadership to harness those opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Al and Mateta. All valuable information. As I've mentioned, we are trying to stimulate discussion and share ideas. Somewhere we need to get to a more formal platform. I can clearly see that would be required. I'm going to go to our third question, and that is the part where we deal with public transport under the COVID situation, where you have social distancing. The question is again twofold. How do we believe the bus industry will balance their books due to social distancing? So what are people doing? They are afraid to use a formal bus service. They're afraid to use a taxi, so they get into a private car or e-hailing, the example that Robin shared. So how do we balance these two against each other? The bus industry is struggling. It's a struggling industry as it is. And how do we get 3 years from now the people out of their cars again? It's a behavioral matter. Davy is not here. May I ask, once Robin has or given his thoughts, Lawrence, would you be willing to also respond to this matter, seeing that you are quite involved with this matter in Tshwane? Okay, Robin, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to actually answer. And I think already, if I look at the Durban, eThekwini, you know that it was initially 70% capacity, and now you're already gone into the 100% capacity. So you can see that I think the industry is really concerned about losing revenue, and therefore that's really what's gone on. I mean, I drove into the city this morning and most taxis were 100%. So from that particular perspective, that's really what's going on. In terms of the subsidized services, all I can actually see is that, I mean, the charge right now is rate per kilometer. So, I mean, it's just basically the amount of mileage that they do, they still get paid that. And it possibly comes back to the question about subsidies just increasing for the city. And the second question about trying to get people out of, I mean, to move from private vehicle to public transport, I think that's actually gone pushed forward. And I think there's going to be a lot of fear in terms of social distancing and people wanting to get into a public transport system. I think even if you look at ride sharing, may suffer a bit because people would want to travel alone in the car or from a safety perspective. So all I can see is that it's really going to push whatever the interventions are forward. And that's really the whole thing. It's just, I mean, as Lawrence is saying, that we're looking through his crystal ball, we really don't know what the answers are going forward.
Thanks, Robin. Lawrence, and may I just ask that the panelists just all leave their video on. Robin, you can leave your video on, then it's much easier to talk. Thanks. Lawrence, in terms of these two questions, your comments.
Yeah, first of all, I think the taxi industry not being a formalized industry, I think they use their masses and they use their maybe some leverage by just telling the Minister Fikile, listen, if you stop one of us, we're going to block all the roads and that type of thing. So they actually do what they want. And whereas the bus industry, and I've been talking to the bus industry in the last week or so, they try and adhere to everything that needs to be done. The province goes and inspect the bus service, the bus depots, and look at the sanitization of things and so on. And they definitely adhere to the 50% occupations and so on. What the arrangement with the Department of Transport is in the provinces is that if they load at least close to about 60% of the capacity, of the seating capacity, they will still get that cent per kilometer subsidy per trip, which is something they need to aim for. And I think government needs to be a little bit more lenient when it comes to specifically this. The question is, what if the demand increases? As we go perhaps to a level 2 or so, the demand will over time increase. And it's easy to say that we will, stagger the working hours, let people work from 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and add more trips and so on. But still, government pays the contract works according to the number of trips, and they're not necessarily going to take one trip and pay the operator for 4 trips, for instance. So if the demand picks up and the pressure is there for more or less social distancing and so on, we're definitely going to have a problem. So government needs to, at some or other stage, intervene and perhaps at the end of the day, throw money at it. If we don't throw money at this problem, I don't think it's going to go away.
Okay. Thank you, Lawrence and Robin. I remind everyone that this is webinar 1 out of 3. And the last webinar out of this, from this series, is going to deal with how do we change our existing transport plans. Now, this whole debate about that we need to get government to come to the party and think, and assist with additional money. I remember with previous transport plans that we've had discussions, and then Treasury is saying, no, you need to improve, you need to fine tune, you sharpen your pencil. But now we need to go back and say, well, let's also, we've done our remodeling. And that's the debate of the third one, just as a general marketing advertisement at this stage. Let us move to the next question. And that is the question about land use. So many questions came in from the floor even today. Let me just first share that. How we formulated that question of even during the registration period. And okay, now it should share. The improved land use planning. Question is, what can be done in particular in metros and large cities to improve the spatial framework? And how will this impact on transport plans? Lawrence, we're going to ask you again. And Mateta, it's just a reminder again, it's a generic structured question from a series of questions related to land use. You will remember that Robin had a lot of this in his presentation, and Lawrence mentioned at the end of his presentation, it's something that we need to do, but it's going to take time. Now, the question is, what can be done in particular? Lawrence, we start with you.
Yeah, this is the most difficult of. I think we've over the years there's lots of theories. You know, land use planners would have told you 30 years ago we're talking about compact cities, we're talking about mixed land uses, we're talking about infilling, those type of things. Everything to bring the residential side of a trip closer to the work opportunity side of a trip. And also to reduce the need for traveling in such. And if distances are shorter, I cannot let people cycle or walk from Mabopane to Pretoria because the distances are simply too far apart. So, but if the distances are closer, one can incentivize things like walking and cycling and all the non-motorized transport aspects. As planners, I think we need to take ownership. You know, we're talking about these things forever, paying lip service to it, putting it in nice documents, and it's a lot of theory. It remains a lot of theory. But at the end of the day, if we don't do something about bringing residential closer to work opportunities or taking work opportunities closer to residential, we will not get anywhere. And, you know, with the transportation planning is also the political will. If you don't have the political will, you can make the nicest plan, but it will never work. So, you know, we cannot move away from public transport. Public transport is the solution. It doesn't matter how you look at it. We need to get people out of their cars onto public transport. So, and the land use and transportation planning needs to go together. It's all in the same basket.
Okay. Mateta?
In the city of Johannesburg recently, the plans or consolidated transport land use plan was put together in the form of total social costs framework. And to explain that, when it's clear how you are accounting for asset and liabilities in the built environment context, and everybody sees that, then you can then effect change, right? Now, you need to know what is your assets at a built environment level, what is your liabilities. So when the network is being valued, it's not just about what accountants say it's the cost of bitumen is the cost of a vehicle and so forth. There are other costs that need to be accounted for in that framework. And that the city of Johannesburg recently did that. And it went through the mayoral committee recently, and it was an eye-opener, because then when you make a decision on the basis of securing not just current generations, but future generations. When we say we need this corridor to be a lung for us, not just now, but into the future, it becomes very clear. And when everybody sees that together, then you can then effect those things. And so that helps us to move away from spending for the sake of complying with the PFMA, Municipal Finance Management Act compliance. Is more about let's build assets for future generations. So it starts with how you measure your account. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mateta. It's clear that some of the metros, and I've heard that from Robin as well, that some major movement in terms of land use planning and how we deal with that is underfoot. It is clear that our suggestions at the third webinar will really come into play. But then, as Lawrence has indicated, is how does such a city look? Just an advertisement, and that is really the title of our next webinar, is how should these cities look? Best cities for the future. Let's move on to the next question, and that is something that a number of people wanted to talk about, and that is non-motorized transport. It was clear that a number of people wanted to say, but what do we do about that? How do we strengthen the non-motorized transport network? Not only the short distance, they are from the community, within the community, and do more about safety and protect the non-motorized transport users. This is, of course, also applicable in the rural environment. Could Al and Robin give us some thoughts on this topic, please? Let's start with Al from the Eastern Cape.
Thank you very much. I am not 100% sure if South Africa generally is a working nation. I do not believe that we really believe, even the planners and policymakers, I don't think at the back of our minds we recognize that we need to plan for non-motorized movers. But I think there is an opportunity. Maybe there are too many policies, I'm sure, that can talk to such things. And the question is, what then is that will be important in order to take us back to ensure that non-motorized transport is recognized. In summarizing this whole issue of, I think policy and planners should consequently try and encourage active travel, while public transport operators on the other side should focus on creating ways for safe use of public transport. Secondly, I'm going to quote from King and Krizek. They have written a paper recently in 2020 where they are advocating for stimulation of walking and cycling, and then to make sure that we allocate the less used streets and spaces within our cities for pedestrians, and ensure that, especially on those places where previously they were affected by congestion, and that therefore we do have adequate walking and cycling infrastructure. Of course, this will work mainly more profound and better in the Sea Point Promenade, and maybe work better in the city of Durban Promenade, where by default there is a natural attrition to walk, there's a natural attrition to cycle and stuff like that. Maybe to a smaller extent with East London, the same can be said for Port Elizabeth. But I think there is a need for concerted efforts by both policymakers and planners to recognize the need for planning and then do policies that talk to such initiatives.
Okay, thank you all. Robin, your response?
Yeah, Frederick, I think that we've been very proactive in this particular aspect. Prior to the lockdown, we already have an NMT policy in place. And you're going to see very shortly in terms of, we just developed a public transport plan for the inner city and the outer ring. And NMT plays a key role in that. And so even when people do TIAs, we try to bring about NMT within that as well in terms of sidewalks and cycle lanes and those things. So from a city perspective, we're really pushing that, the urban mobility aspect of non-motorized transport coming into play. So I think as a city, I'm quite excited about that. And I think that where we can go now is, as I was saying, that some of these bigger projects, infrastructure projects, is really going to be pushed forward. And maybe some of these projects in terms of cycle lanes, NMT facilities that we've always had on the cars with sidewalks and stuff can now be strengthened because these smaller projects and where budgets can go in and start to get done. So yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of NMT stuff, NMT facilities happening within the city of Durban.
What is quite clear is that this need to form part of the total transport plan.
Yeah.
Let's move to the next question. And I'm just gonna, and that is to do with network optimization. A number of people wanted to have discussion on that. And that is a question, what would the current situation influence future considerations concerning financial viability of the transport network and transport corridors and classes of roads and streets? Are we gonna have maybe a public transport route and then something else or less instead of those 5 classes that we've had? Mateta, could you share some thoughts on that? And Robin, from your perspective in eThekwini? Mateta, thank you.
Okay. I think based on what we are seeing now, the numbers that I quoted earlier, that at best, typical bus operator who's been profitable, would recover, 28 or so % of the total costs, based on the social distancing or physical distancing regulations that are there. A minibus taxi, they are running with very low margins. So what I think the situation presents an opportunity for planning for resilience. I think this aspect, COVID, it may be there for a year or two, but we've got a much bigger, crisis of climate change, going forward. So the term resilience needs to find its, way into our plans. And when we implement, when we communicate, resilience needs to come in. So here's an opportunity that when we talk, when we present, we mention resilience. We could have averted some of these things had we implemented much more resilient interventions over the years. From Moving South Africa, you go to Moving South Africa 1998 document. You'd think that and look at a document that is generated now. Not much has changed. So we've lost a lot of opportunities, and perhaps with the political leadership and everybody else seeing how important planning for resilience is, we then need to. So I definitely think it will influence, it should influence, but we need to take on that opportunity as planners to influence budgeting for resilience. Thanks.
Thank you, Mateta. Robin?
Yeah,
your comment?
I wanted to say the transport planning is a dynamic process and it's constantly evolving to accommodate changes. So I think that we must also be careful, some of the changes that we make in terms of land use, the pandemics, the economic drivers, and our plans needs to basically navigate through the scenarios to emerge appropriately. So we know that this pandemic is projecting a lot of losses, job losses, huge impacts on the economy. But I think this will result in less impact on the transport system as a whole. In effect, transport plans that have been done may only require infrastructure services much later than was originally predicted. So I really think that we need to be careful to not make far-reaching changes that can come back to haunt us, as due diligence was not done systematically. So I think in the 80s and early 90s, the world was impacted by the AIDS pandemic, and all transport plans, I know the city, our plans incorporated this aspect into our scenario planning that was undertaken. So the resulting impact on transport provision was quite significant, although I think the important thing is the fundamentals have not really changed. And so I think that I'm quite happy that we've got quite robust plans, but it's really the infrastructure comes at a point in time. Thanks, Frederick.
Thank you very much. All very valid. And then lastly, at the topic of rural transport development, that came out of from a number of people asking, what are we doing there in terms of rural transport? If I just look at Al's presentation, and we've derived the questions before we had the presentations, is that there are so many people in desperate need for improved transport in a rural environment. Now the question is, what can or should be done to speed up the provision of transport infrastructure and services to provide economic stability and perhaps even reduce migration to cities where the migration happens so fast that the cities can't plan fast enough for that. Lawrence first, and then last comments from Al, please.
I think, Frederick, I think what we actually need to look at, why are people actually moving towards cities? You know, it's this utopia in cities of, you know, hope of work opportunities and livelihood, and this it's so working so nicely in the city, and then people actually move to the city and they are forced into a shack and they don't have work, and they're reliable on other people, or have to rely on family and friends to make a living there. So it actually boils down to things like stimulating the economy in the rural areas and creating jobs. That's the basic of it. Unfortunately, there's a sad side of it. You know, we've got just outside Tshwane, for instance, we've got the Themba Babalege area, and in Bronkhorstspruit area, we've got the industrial area, where industrial areas have over time been established, and they not necessarily supported anymore, or they're not fully taken up anymore. You know, so we have actually created job opportunities. We have actually tried to stimulate the economy. There were incentives for companies and factories to go and settle in those areas, with then rebates on their taxes and so on, just to incentivize them to go and establish there, and to give work to the local communities and so on. And sadly, it doesn't work. But you know, I think new energy needs to be put in that, and that's the only way. You need to stimulate the economy, and you need to create jobs. If you do that, people will stay in the rural areas and not necessarily all move towards the cities.
Thanks, Lawrence. Al, your comments.
It's very basic and simple, like Mr. Sonapol said, stimulating the economy in those settlements. But if I were to add, I don't know whether it's because of my biasness or my likeness of the Karoo, I've got this belief that it's not necessarily going to happen that everybody is going to want to move to Johannesburg, to Cape Town, to Port Elizabeth, to Durban, and so on. What I've seen over the last 3 years, when I read most of the write-ups from people who love the Karoo, is that there is this interesting movement of people from the hinterland, from the cities rather, to your places like Frafrenet, Beaufort West, the Sutherland, and so on and so forth. I don't know what it is that has pushed them to do that. And only last week, there was a debate where some journalist was asking estate agents within the Karoo communities in particular, what is it that has happened in their space? And they are saying for the first time in years, they've got a surge of requests for properties within the Karoo. And I think it's because of the perception that the Karoo region in general is, because of its sparseness, is generally safer, especially for the COVID environment. And if it were to sustain itself and stay longer, people would want to move to such settlements. And therefore, it's probably not by default that everybody would want to move. But of course, like Mr. Sonapol said, investment in there is one of the things. And if I may add, we need to invest also in our maintenance regime of what I call unproclaimed roads, so that at least there's some elements and level of accessibility and mobility within the settlements. And lastly, I think he would probably remember, if he was part of the study, in one of the visions of the Eastern Cape through the development of what we called the Provincial Integrated Public Transport Network, it's just the provision of what I call basic public transport service of some sort, so that at least there is accessibility and mobility within settlements and within from settlements to the towns and so on. But other than that, it's more about the capital investment. If I had the time, I would have given you what I think the Republic of Botswana has done in order to capture people as far as possible from moving to the cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin and Al. I must say we've been busy for 2 hours now, and it is really exciting to see that we still have more than 140, it's about 138 now, 137 now. We've agreed that we're not going to go longer than 2 hours, and I'm therefore going to close this session. We thank everyone that was participating in this webinar and the preparation and time. Just in thanks, firstly, Debbie, to arrange all and sending out all the invitations and prepare. Our committee members, Robin, Madeleine, Victor, Johan, and so many others that assisted in facilitating this process. Thank you very much. And our presenters, in the end, we only had 4 left, and we are going to make plan to have Dawie back at the next or a future round of discussions. And to all of you, in terms of your time, our presenters, there's really just a small token of appreciation, which is, I'm going to put it on the screen now, is a book, Travels in the South, A History of South African Roads, written by Malcolm Mitchell and Brian Downey. Brian was the president of SAICE last year, and Malcolm Mitchell was the person I referred to being 84 years old. He registered for this webinar. So Malcolm, if you're there, thank you for attending and keep on supporting the industry, and thank you for this valuable book. The panelists, presenters, can you, we'll make sure that we have your physical addresses and so forth, that we can just send you this book. It's really a very nice book to have and to read, nighttime reading or during the day, coffee time. It's fantastic pictures of the older days, how the network works in South Africa has been planned. So Malcolm, thank you to you and your team, and thank you to our panelists. Just a reminder, our next event is going to be, please diarize that already, the 13th of August. And we are asking the question, as we've said in our last marketing material, how can cities be less dependent on motorized transport? It deals with the matter of climate change that I've heard earlier. It deals with land use. We need to make a new plan, think how we can optimize what we have. From my side, thank you very much to everyone attending. May I just say that we are going to do a few things. Around about tomorrow, we will already circulate the a recording of today's event, the presentations and the like, and the whole discussion process that went through in the day. Then we're also preparing a bit of a technical note that we'll also post on our website. That takes a little bit longer. We are finalizing the previous webinars document still. and we need to be careful what we say and how we say that. And really, as from a industry, we are trying to stimulate thoughts and make sure that we consider as wide as possible various aspects that we may have omitted in the past or in the recent past due to various reasons. Also, we are hoping to compress this series at least in some sort of a course, although it may be very basic or in some summary that can be shared. We have not decided exactly how we're going to do that. Everyone attending today, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for the presentations, panelists, and thank you very much to everyone listening and holding on for the 2 hours. Our apologies for our struggle at the start to get going. That was just IT and it's not anyone's particular fault. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Stay safe, stay well. And then just a last comment. Tomorrow is Robin's 50th birthday, and that's why we had the presentation and the webinar today. So Robin, happy birthday to you. Hope you have a real blessed 50th birthday, and spend time with your family. God bless, and yeah, stay safe. Go well, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thanks everyone.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye everybody.